Ontario families have a lot of concerns about the foreign government's cuts. I'd like to start with our schools. Over the summer, the Financial Accountability Officer confirmed that the government's education cuts will eliminate 10,000 teachers from the province. Does the Premier believe the quality of Ontario's schools will improve with 10,000 fewer teachers?
Questions addressed to the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to welcome the Leader of the Opposition back in the House here, and I want to congratulate our all-star Minister of Education, the way you've been handling this file. Mr. Speaker, our government has invested over $700 million back into the classroom. That's more money than any government in the history of Ontario. We've announced a 4-year, $200 million math strategy, because we know 50% of our grade 6 students are failing math, Mr. Speaker, and 1/3 of those teachers that are teaching that math course also failed that math test. We are taking cell phones out of the classroom, Mr. Speaker. We're making financial literacy a key part of our math curriculum and a major component of the new grade 10 careers course, so students know how to budget after they leave school. We're creating a new math curriculum for grades 1 to 8, which will be ready in the next school year. We are more than doubling mental health funding in schools and supporting 180 permanent mental health support staff.
Thank you. Thank you. The supplementary question.
Well, Speaker, I would suggest that if you want a world-class education system, you don't get there by firing the people who deliver it, who provide it, or, frankly, by forcing students into larger classrooms and stripping them of course options. The Premier has had 5 months to think about it, Speaker. Is he now ready to admit that his plan to eliminate 10,000 teachers and thousands more educational workers is going to hurt kids in the classroom?
Premier.
Minister of Education.
Refer to the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you. I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question and just express, if I may, on behalf of my family, just the great humility it is to rise in this House as Minister of Education, having cared for 2 million young people in the province. Mr. Speaker, it is the aim of this Minister and this government to ensure every young person in this province is able to achieve their potential. We are doing that, as the Premier has acknowledged, through increasing public expenditure, the highest level ever recorded in provincial history. We're doing this, Madam Speaker, by ensuring we have the highest expenditure ever recorded in special education, in transportation, in First Nation education. Madam Speaker, we have more than doubled the mental health envelope. Student success and their well-being is the central focus, as is keeping children in the class through the labour negotiations. We will continue to focus on the success of our kids in the days
Response.
to achieve their potential.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Well, Speaker, after months of insisting that reckless cuts wouldn't hurt kids in the classroom, the Premier can no longer deny reality. 10,000 teachers' jobs are going to vanish in our province. Schools already are losing youth counsellors, social workers, speech-language pathologists, and other educational workers and supports. Course options have disappeared, as I've already said, so fast that some students aren't even sure that they're going to be able to graduate on time in this school year. And a few weeks ago, parents spent a nervous weekend not knowing if schools would actually be opening their doors on Monday morning. Why is the Premier still insisting, and this Minister still insisting, that the budget cuts aren't impacting kids in the classroom when we all know they in fact are?
Minister.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. We know that parents deserve predictability and peace of mind over the coming year. It is why, Mr. Speaker, we've undertaken to negotiate in good faith with all of our union partners. It is why, Mr. Speaker, we were able to, through a voluntary agreement, while it is tentative, reach a deal with QB to keep children in the classrooms of this province. Mr. Speaker, it is the aim of this government to ensure that children are able to succeed, are able to achieve their potential, are able to get access to good careers in high-wage industries. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we've increased expenditure and investment in our children. It's why we're renewing our schools for over $500 million investment to get new schools built and renew the existing ones. It's why we're updating our curriculum to have greater alignment with labour market needs. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to support positive mental health and a progressive physical health curriculum that ensures the safety of our kids today and well into the future.
Thank you. The next question, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. My next question is for the Premier. You know, the Premier spent most of the past 5 months either hiding or in damage control. Last year, this Premier insisted that not a single person in our province would lose their job and that our schools, hospitals and public services would improve as he made cuts. Today we're joined by Natalie and Brittany, both teachers who've lost their jobs. Is the Premier ready to admit that these women and the students that have lost the support that these teachers provided, that his reckless cuts had consequences?
Questions to the Premier.
Minister of Education.
Refer to the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you again to the member opposite. What the Financial Accountability Officer did say is that the Teacher Protection Fund, the $1.6 billion allocation announced in the last budget to ensure frontline teachers remain in the front lines is in fact working. In fact, he said that the fund is oversubscribed, that there's more money needed to ensure the retention of those teachers in the front line. Mr. Speaker, we are investing $24 billion in school boards to ensure that they could do best in their localities to help young people succeed, to help them graduate and get a good-paying job. We are not going to be deterred from that mission on focusing on the success of our kids, focusing on the success of our young people as they go through the journey of learning so that they can one day get access to a good job.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Well, Speaker, it's obvious that the Teacher Protection Fund is not working because I just talked about Brittany and Natalie, who are teachers that have lost their jobs here in Ontario. The Ford government has scrambled this week to undo the political damage caused by their reckless cuts, but for families hit hard by cuts to their schools, waits in their hospitals or loss of public services, repackaging the same cuts on a different timeline doesn't make them any more acceptable or less painful. Can the Premier explain to families why he's plowing ahead with an agenda of cuts, or will he finally admit that all of these cuts have serious consequences?
Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to be clear, our objective to the labour negotiations is to ensure that the students of this province remain in class. That is the singular priority of this Premier. He has made clear he wants children's education not to be interrupted. He wants them to continue to be able to learn the competencies needed in a competitive global marketplace. That is why we undertook an ambitious plan to negotiate in good faith, early with CUPE, in an expedited fashion, and we so far have received a tentative agreement with CUPE that has helped ensure we achieve that objective by keeping kids in class. With respect to other labour partners, on behalf of millions of working families, my focus is on our students and not on strikes. Let's ensure we never compromise the success of our students, and I want a deal with our teachers.
Final supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. And back to the Premier on the general issue of the cuts. For 5 long months, the Ford government has tried to rebrand and repackage their agenda of cuts. The Premier threw his former finance and education ministers under the bus. He fired his former chief of staff. He even tried shutting down the legislature and hiding from reporters. But none of those changes hide the actual facts, Speaker. Students in our schools are losing teachers and educational workers who are supportive of their learning. Patients in our hospitals are watching nurses lose their jobs as beds continue to close and wait times continue to grow. Those are the things that the Premier needs to change, Speaker. Those are the changes that the people of Ontario need to see, not the changes that he's made over the last little while. When are those changes going to happen, Speaker?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Speaker. In fact, if I may, I just want to correct the record, Madam Speaker. In the areas of education, healthcare alone, in education, we are spending over $700 million more this year than at the height of Liberal spending in 2017-18. Madam Speaker, in healthcare, it is under the Deputy Premier's leadership that we are investing more than $1.3 billion more than the year prior to help remediate the issue of hallway healthcare. Mr. Speaker, we are doing all this without raising taxes, while growing the economy, so that we are able to sustain the social services that are so consequential to the next generation of workers, innovators, and patients in the province of Ontario. We're going to continue on our plan to grow the economy, invest in the services that families depend on, because that's what the families of this province have asked us to do.
The next question, once again, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. My next question is also to the Premier. Last year, in response to questions about the Ford government's $30 million partisan campaign against putting a price on carbon pollution, the Premier said he would stop wasting public money and resources if the federal Conservatives lost. Because, to quote him, once the people decide, I respect democracy. Last week, despite these promises, the Premier insisted that he would proceed. My question is why?
Questions to the Premier.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Speaker. We ran on making life more affordable for the people of Ontario. We ran on making sure we're competitive when it comes to businesses when we're competing around the world. We didn't run on increasing gas prices by 35 cents a litre. It's unaffordable. We didn't run on making the carbon tax will cost families another $700 more a year. They just can't afford it. We have a great plan. We have a great environment plan. We're going to hit the Paris Accord targets at 30%. We're already at 22.5% with 10 years to go. We're leading the country in emission reductions, Mr. Speaker. We have a great plan, but that plan does not include taxing the people of Ontario, taxing businesses, making sure that we are competitive when it comes to businesses, and that's why our policies created 272,000 new jobs.
Thank you. Thank you. Supplementary question.
Well, Speaker, the Premier might claim he has targets, but nobody's going to know if he hits them or not because he fired the Environmental Commissioner, Speaker. Look, the Premier said that he would respect democracy, and democracy was pretty clear, Speaker. More than 2 out of 3 Ontarians rejected the Doug Ford government and their climate change denial. They said no to diverting $30 million from schools, hospitals, etc., to pay for lawyers and advertisements. They said no to threatening gas stations with $10,000 fines if they refuse to put partisan stickers on the gas pumps that don't stick. Will the Premier abandon this obscene waste of public money, show some respect for democracy and our planet, Speaker, and work on a plan to actually tackle the climate crisis instead of ignore it?
Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition was wondering what we were doing for the last few months. Well, I'll tell you what we've been doing in the last few months. We secured a historic transit plan that we put forward, a historic deal with the federal government, with the City of Toronto and the provincial government. Called the Ontario Line, Mr. Speaker. Our Minister of Education reached a deal with QP, a historic deal to keep the kids in the classroom. We invested $160 million into the rural road and bridge projects through our Minister of Transportation and our Infrastructure Minister, including widening Highway 3 in Essex. Can't wait to get to Essex. Ontario created 81,000 new jobs just since June. 272,000 new jobs in the private sector because of the great policies this government has put forward, and we're making new investments to fight against gun.
Thank you. Thank you.